Years ago, when Bill O'Reilly had a show on Fox, they called me up and asked me to come speak on immigration.
Yeah.
And then I gave them my position, and they uninvited me.
Oh, wow.
And I said, why? And they said, well, we need you to choose an extreme position on one side or the other.
Okay.
And I said, but both extreme positions are wrong. And they said, yeah, they literally told me, you're too thoughtful for our show. We need people who are extremists because that's how Bill plays off of people.
Wow.
And I think that's the problem, is that our cultural conversation is all about extremes. And neither extreme is ever right.
That's good.
Because they're blind to the realities on the other side. I think to say that President Biden, by leaving the border so open and having almost no regulations, didn't create a problem is to be dishonest. And to say that ICE, through its almost hostile language, isn't creating a cultural problem is dishonest. And it's going to take someone or some people to just say there are real problems in both sides of this, and that's why we're where we're at.
Yeah.
But if we could actually care about people, we might find a solution that works.
All right, let's go ahead and get right into it. Immigration in America isn't just a political conversation. It's a conversation that is personal. It's a conversation about people and humans. It's about families. It's about where you land in your faith walk, right? You got people's lives getting torn apart, people being separated from their loved ones, having to go to a country that they never lived in simply because they're not a legal citizen of this country. And the problem is our culture wants to treat it like it's a debate stage. And often the loudest voices are the ones who are least affected by it. You got one extreme versus another extreme. But I heard this interview that Lecrae did from Pastor Erwin McManus, and he's saying that both extremes are wrong, right? And so what do we do as Christians when it comes to deportation, especially when it isn't just about policies? You got kids involved. You got kids losing their parents and families being ripped apart. So where do we stand on it? And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to look at this interview that Lecrae did with the pastor, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit of my thoughts as well. Let's go ahead and hop right into it.
So one, I'm curious about how you see your immigrant story, right? Like how you see that and how that experience was for you. And then looking at what's happening in America now, like what is your vantage point with everything going on with ICE and so on and so forth? Because you do look at things from different angles, and I'd be curious to see, how do you see this?
It's funny because years ago, when Bill O'Reilly had a show on Fox, they called me up and asked me to come speak on immigration.
Yeah.
And then I gave them my position, and they uninvited me.
Oh, wow.
And I said, why? And they said, well, we need you to choose an extreme position on one side or the other.
Okay.
And I said, but both extreme positions are wrong. And they said, yeah, they literally told me, you're too thoughtful for our show. We need people who are extremists because that's how Bill plays off of people.
Wow.
And I think that's the problem, is that our cultural conversation is all about extremes. And neither extreme is ever right.
That's good.
Because they're...
Yeah, no, I've been saying this over and over again. We live in a culture right now that thrives on extremes, and neither side is right. Or both sides think they're so right that they can't see that there may be some truth in the other side. You got one group so far on one end, they can't see past their own biases, right? And then you got another group just as blind on the other side. And somewhere in the middle is where the truth lies. And then people will try to say, oh, well, you're lukewarm if you in the middle. Or you not choosing sides and you're wishy-washy or whatever. But the reality of it is that often a person's reality is based off of their perception, right? Now, there is objective truth, but there's also some subjective truth as well. So, for example, when you talk about police brutality, not all police are brutal and treating people bad, but the people who are getting their butt kicked by the police got a different reality than the people who live in these nice neighborhoods. I was literally just at a HEB in a poor side of town, and I was reminded of how blessed I am, one, to have been able to serve in the military, do well for myself, and be able to move into a nicer side of town. But then I was just reminded of how life is completely different on the other side of town as well, because I grew up in areas that's poor. And it's just so amazing to me that the food quality, the options that are available to me on the side of town that I live at, is completely different on another side of town in the same exact store. And so my reality out where I live at and their reality out where they live at is completely different. And I was fortunate enough to be able to see both sides of it. But this is the problem that you have when you're dealing with extremes, right? When you're locked into one extreme, you can't even consider that you actually might be wrong. You won't even pause to ask, could there be some truth in what the other person is saying? You refuse to acknowledge that perception often shapes reality. And if you can take the time to understand where somebody else is coming from, then you can possibly be able to reach them. And if you never do that, you're not going to be able to reach them. Both are just going to keep screaming out who's right and who's wrong. But let's let them finish.
Blind to the realities on the other side. I am an immigrant, and I have little moments where my grandfather prepared me, because I was raised by my grandparents when I was a small boy, and my grandfather would prepare me to come to the States. And he couldn't speak English, but he understood America. And he gave me 5 accents for how to say water. He said, Americans don't say water the same. And he started saying it like a New Yorker, like a Texan, like a Southerner, like a Californian. Wow. And so he taught me to listen to the linguistic nuances when you're learning a new language. And then he told me, hey, when you go to the States, they're going to call you an Indian. And they're going to call you an Indian because they made a mistake and landed on the wrong continent. And then he said, do not let another man's mistakes define who you are.
This man.
Oh, wow. I like that. Do not let another man's mistakes define who you are. It's actually hit hard to me as a Black person in America, right? Because there are all these, there's a couple of things. One, there's all these unspoken rules of what it means to be Black, right? And then people say, if you can't do this or you can't do that, and if you do this, then you don't really love your people, right? And for me, being in a interracial marriage, I've heard it all, right? People question if I care about my mom, or if I care about my community, or if I somehow betray where I came from, and those kind of things, right? And all those assumptions are just that, just assumptions. You don't know how I feel about my family. You don't know why I chose to be with the person that I chose with. And that doesn't make me any less Black as well, right? And they try to put you in this box of what you should be. But I learned that the world is so much bigger than the culture or the community, what the culture and the community says. And that's one of the greatest gifts about me being in the military, right? See, when I was growing up in Atlanta, my worldview was small. But when I joined the Air Force, I realized that the world was way bigger than Atlanta. I got to see different countries, got to meet different people. I got to experience different cultures, and I got to see that, the racial divide between Black and white here in America is not like that everywhere else, right? Matter of fact, it's extremely different in the South as it is out west towards Arizona and California. And see, that perspective actually changed how I view on these unspoken rules, and they don't define me anymore. But I'm also not going to let the mistakes of another person define me either. People try to tell you what Black culture is supposed to be. And if you really sit down and think about it, a lot of times it's often something that's negative. And I'm not judging, because I used to be in some of that same negative stuff myself, right? Like, people literally brag on coming from poverty, or robbing people, or manipulating people, or doing certain things to get over on women as a man, right? But then there's some positive things as well. And so me personally, I just had to, as I got older and as I grew up, I had to learn that it's okay for me not to accept the negative things in the wrong, right? We often look at what my parents did, what mama did, or what my friends did, and that kind of shaped who I am. But if I'm going to be personal here for a second, my dad ended up dying in prison. He was a drug dealer. He beat women, and he actually murdered somebody. And so statistically speaking, I'm supposed to be same way as my father is. But what my dad did does not define me. How my dad act does not define me. Now, let's take my mom, for example. My mom, single mom, raised me and my sisters and my brothers, took care of us. Now she's married. But a majority of the time when I was growing up, my mom was a single mom taking care of us, right? And so I looked at some of those values that she had, and I instilled that as an adult now. And so I'm not gonna let the mistakes of my father or my friends or what culture say I should be define who I am. And then let's look at it on the flip side. Right, he talked about how they're gonna call him an Indian because they don't understand, right? And they call us the N-word for whatever reason. They say we're Black and we're N-words and we're less than, and they use that to put us down. And as Black people, we took that and now we use it as a term of endearment, and we feel like we're the only ones who can say it, or those kind of things. But at the end of the day, I'm not an N-word. I am not who people say I am. I can care less about what people say I am. I really care more about who God say I am, and I'm a child of God. And so I decided, and I'm not going to live under certain labels that people put under me, even under the Christianity label, right? I don't have to identify as a Catholic, non-denominational, or all these other things. I just identify somebody who follows Christ. I believe what the Bible says, and I'm going to try my best to have a relationship with him and be obedient to him. And so if that means today I'm a Calvinist and tomorrow I'm a whatever else, Armenian, then whatever the case may be. And if I feel like those camps are wrong in what they're saying, then I'm not going to allow those mistakes to label me, right? No more than I'm going to allow my past to label me, because now that I'm a child of God, I'm saved. And no more am I going to allow stereotypes to label me as well. And so we have to kind of get outside of that and realize that we're all humans, we're all people, and often our life experience kind of shape who we are, but don't allow what somebody else mistakes or ignorance or all that to define who you are. I'm just not going to do it.
Brilliant.
He was brilliant. And then I'm 5 years old, and he pulls out a map, explains to me that the Asians migrated across the Bering Strait and colonized the Americas, and how we're actually all rooted in even the same cultures that are divided across different continents. And he just gave me such a broad global perspective on humanity, that we're always migrating and moving to new places. And so for my brother and I, because he was 2 years older than me, coming to the States and learning English, you immediately know what it's like to be an outsider. And I think that's one of the interesting things about language. When you learn a new language, you know what it's like to be an outsider looking in. But later, you actually know how to see the world from a multi-dimensional perspective. People who speak multiple languages actually have parts of their brain that function that aren't active, and people only speak one language. And so I have a lot of friends who speak with an accent, and they're embarrassed. And I'll always tell them, hey, the reason you have an accent is that you're smarter than people who do not. Because you are now speaking another language that you didn't begin with.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was literally thinking about this the other day, right? And so at my job, I work in adult education, and one of the things that we offer is English as second language classes, right? And so a lot of the new students, they have to come in and they got to take these digital literacy tests before they start the program. And it's kind of just gauge if they're going to be successful in the program or not, right? And I remember thinking like they would have to take these two tests, and some people would struggle or take longer on the test. And it's because they are coming in to try to learn English. They speak a different language. They're trying to learn this language, but they got to take this test that's kind of sort of in English to kind of show if they can do it. And I remember thinking like, man, if I had to take a test in a different country, in another language, I would fail that test, right? And I have to take my hat off to these people who are able to pick up on these multiple languages. You right? I took Spanish 2 years in high school, and I cannot speak a lick of Spanish, right? And so I'm just really sitting here thinking like we often hear these people come in with the accents and they're struggling to speak it in English, but at least they're trying, right? And at least they're learning it. And they got to pick up jobs and work and go to school and be in these arenas where they got to speak in a different language than what they're naturally used to. And so, I believe they are smarter, and they are, using a different part of their brain that I obviously can't do, because I've done it I tried it for 2 years and I'm still struggling at it. And it's, I feel like that it's a gift, right? It's actually a gift that stretches you to use parts of your brain that most people will never touch. And I'm a person who graduated summa cum laude both in my bachelor's and my master's, and I still can't do it. So listen, I salute people who mastered it.
Wow.
But I will say this. I know you want to, you're asking me about immigration and ICE and everything like that. There are several things that really stand out to me. One is that most of the immigration conversations we're having right now are actually political. They're not human. And because for most of my experience in the States, this has been a practical reality of illegal immigration, of trying to figure out how do you bring people in? How do you not let people in? It took me decades to become an American citizen. I didn't become an American citizen until I was 50, because El Salvador really isn't like a favored nation. And so you could be from another country and become a citizen faster. My wife, who was always politically against, quote, illegal immigration, she always hired 30, 40, 50 people who were not legal, and would give every single person she met a job. I said, honey, you're the most pro-undocumented person I've ever met in my life. And so sometimes we're for something as a concept, but we're actually against it on a human level. And I think that's the problem, is that am I for deporting everyone here illegally? Not all the people I love, not all the people I know. And because it changes its meaning, right? And also, am I for protecting the borders? Yes, if my family has been violated or injured or hurt. And a lot of it's really a human problem in the most personal ways. I think a lot of this being politicized. I mean, when President Obama was president, he deported at least 3 million people. And Clinton was against open borders and was for very, very, very limited immigration. Bush actually was married into a Mexican family. And so he was psychologically more open to open borders, but a lot of times their policies don't even match what they believe. And I think what's happening now is Trump's language was so filled with vitriol that you're able to politicize it and go, you see, he's against immigrants. And he doesn't help himself. By the way, he says things, but he hasn't been as extreme as Hillary Clinton has been. She just said it differently. And then Clinton said it in extreme ways, but he still felt like he was warm and caring. And so sometimes it's less about the language or the policy as it is almost like the radioactive material you're sending out. Am I for the outsider? So for me, I'm very, very practical.
Yeah, let me pause it there because he make a valid point. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that's one thing about President Trump is that he can be a little harsh with the way he come off. But if you take it on the flip side, for example, right? Me serving in the military, I can see a need for something to take place. Like he said, this is very political right now, and we're kind of overlooking the human side of it, but there is some need for action, right? Our dollar value is less. Crime is increased in a lot of places, and people are just getting frustrated, right? And we get these politicians who tell us over and over again that they're going to fix the problem, they're going to do something, but then you bring in somebody like Trump who can care less what you think about him, right? And his approach can come off as harsh, but at least he's trying to do something. And if we're being honest, sometimes harshness gets results, right? I think about it in my own kids. If I calmly ask them to clean their room or handle their chores, they often ignore me. They often put it off. They often do it later. But if I raise my voice or if I threaten it with consequences like taking something away, then all of a sudden they moving and they getting things done. And sometimes drastic problems does require drastic measures, and that's often uncomfortable, right? Now, what I'm not saying is that Trump approach is perfect. I'm not saying is that there's no room for empathy, because the human side of me is like, man, it sucks that people have to go through these things. It sucks that families are being ripped apart. But then there's also is laws there, and there's something that has to be done, right? If I decide to go to any other country in the world and don't follow their processes, there's going to be consequences to those actions, right? And then when you get somebody who's actually doing something about it, then we criticize them. And it's easy to criticize the person who's doing it. I tell my team this all the time. Like, listen, remember, our bosses have bosses. So some of the things that we're dealing with and some of the things that we're facing is coming from a higher level. And so then when you get people like the government coming in or ICE coming in and handling things certain ways, they're getting their orders from certain people. And I really like the fact that he highlighted that other politicians were doing it as well. They just kind of spoke differently, or we took it differently, right? Or it wasn't the hot topic, right? Because at the end of the day, depending on where you get your news will determine how you view the world. And that's just the reality of how things are going today. But when you have somebody like President Trump, who he's rich, he doesn't need anything from anybody, and so he can come in and do what he need to do and get business done. And if you really think about it, most people who are successful, they've already figured it out and they're comfortable with, hey, I'm going to have certain people who rock with me and follow me, and I'm going to have people who don't like me. And often the people who don't like you are the ones that help make you even be more successful or more famous or be put out up front, like your boy Andrew Tate or Charleston White. They thrive and they make a business off of people not liking them, but they're also able to get things done and be successful in life. And so you have somebody like President Trump who's like, hey, listen, if we don't do something, then our dollar value is gonna be worthless. If we don't do something in these cities that got a bunch of crime and issues, then how can we say we care about our people if we're not doing that to fix the problem? And then we'll go to another country and fix those problems. See, these are things that if you speak on and if you talk about, now all of a sudden you're against the other side and you're the enemy. But listen, let's come in the middle and let's just say, hey, how do we address these problems in the most humane way as possible? But ignoring the problem is just simply not an option, right? And so that's where that tension kind of comes into play.
The goal in that. I know that nations need to have borders.
Sure.
And I know there needs to be security. And I know that there are millions of really good people that are here that came undocumented. And we have a very personal story. There was a young girl who was 15 or so years old, came here illegally, didn't even know she was here illegally. And she came on a bus. They didn't stop her. She happened to be very, very pretty. And I think that, she got pretty privileged, even though she was undocumented. And came across, but now she was living in a really violent home and having to protect little children from getting beat and abused. My wife said, "You're bringing Patty home from church today on Sunday, and we're going to give her a place to stay tonight." And she stayed 12 years. She was undocumented, and if you want to use language, she was illegal. Yes, so I housed an illegal immigrant in my house for years. And then I helped her get her green card. Then I helped her become an American citizen. She became an American citizen before I did. We put her in kindergarten. She went from kindergarten to 12th grade in 3 years. Got a college degree from University of California here, Cal State LA, and then went as a missionary to Indonesia for 10 years to work with Muslims with her husband and kids, and now lives here. And so we have the full immigrant story, of someone who began as someone undocumented. So was I for that undocumented person? Of course. And that's why for me, you can talk about political things, but let's just talk about human things and see if we can get to a good place together.
It sounds
Yeah, let's talk about human things. And see, that's what I'm saying, right? Because this is what make this whole conversation a tough one. On one hand, right, you don't want to see families ripped apart. You hear stories like this little girl, and of course you want to help her. You want to get them out of these tough situations, right? You hear kids losing their parents. You got people are being deported who have lived here their whole lives. It's heartbreaking, and it's not what people want to see. It's not what nobody wants to see. I don't want to see. We don't. Like it's horrible. Like especially when there's a person who only ever lived in America and then they're told they gotta go somewhere else. That's horrible. And I don't know how many people that's actually happening to, but if it's happening, it is a horrible, horrible thing, right? But on the other hand, we can't ignore laws. We can't just completely just allow illegal activity to happen either. There are rules for a reason. And the question becomes, do we break rules to meet people's needs, or do we enforce laws even when it hurts families? And sometimes you got to just be willing to say, hey, I'm going to deal with the consequences of whatever happened with those actions. So like when you had the peaceful protest that Dr. Martin Luther King did and the different things that Malcolm X did, they decided that, hey, these laws are unjust. We're going to do something about it. And we're going to deal with the actions that come with it. Right? But in the case of this, in his story, in his example, we got a problem. She's a legal immigrant. She's in a tough situation. Let's help her do it right. And I love the fact that, hey, he admitted, hey, I housed an illegal immigrant, but I also went through the proper steps to make it right. And see, that's where the tension is at. And that's where I believe that we have to kind of get to a point where we're like, okay, how can I be empathetic and do the right thing at the same time, right? Like how when they tried to trip Jesus up with the whole pay taxes thing, and he looked at the coin, and they knew they were trying to put him in a position where he was going to accept one extreme or the other extreme. And Jesus was so smart with it. He was like, who faces on the coin? Give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give to God what's God's. And so that's just the mentality that we kind of got to be at. We got to do the things that God has instructed us to do as Christians, but then we also got to follow our rules and our laws if those rules and laws are not having us go against what God is saying, right? And what I love about how Erwin framed it is that he's saying, hey, let's step back and let's look at this as humans first. Because when you start from empathy, when you start from a place that show you care, then the solutions that you find and that you look for, they look a little different, right? And it's not just politics, it's people, it's human. And that's where I believe that the real change actually starts to happen.
To me, like, I mean, this may not be what you're saying, but one, it's nuanced. And then two, oftentimes politics can be much like the Pharisees saying, hey, Jesus, do we eat on the Sabbath or do we not? Do we give Caesar this coin or do we not? And it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I
think to say that President Biden, by leaving the border so open and having almost no regulations, didn't create a problem is to be dishonest. And to say that ICE, through its almost hostile language, isn't creating a cultural problem is dishonest. And it's going to take someone or some people to just say there are real problems in both sides of this, and that's why we're where we're at. But if we could actually care about people, we might find a solution that works. And because there are so many people here, and by the way, the whole idea of a dual economy is kind of scary to me, because when you're looking, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm just going to say that straight up. I voted for President Obama twice. I don't usually say that publicly, but I'm just going to go ahead and just lay that out there. Okay. So you understand my perspective on this. And when you say we need to allow undocumented people to come and work in the farms and the fields and everything else, what you're actually saying is that you're pro an underground slavery system. Because when you're raising minimum wage, see, listen to the language. We want to raise minimum wage to $50 an hour.
Come on.
Which means that you're going to get a pretty good salary, and you're not going to have to work the farm jobs or something like that. So what's happening, and I'm in the fashion industry. What ends up happening is that you create a system where you allow people to enter the country to be paid dollars, and then you raise minimum wage to $50 an hour. So you're creating an unstated slavery system. So my point is, if you're going to let people in who are undocumented, then we should be forced to pay them what we're paying everyone here who is documented. To say, well, who's going to take care of our kids, and who's going to farm the lands, and who's going to work the crops? And I've heard even Nancy Pelosi say things like that. What she's actually saying is, where's our slave class going to come from if we don't allow undocumented people to come? And I'm like, we should not be allowing a slave class. If you're going to let them in, protect them. If we need to force ourselves to pay for the people we allow to be here, and by paying them for the jobs they work. And so I think that's the part that concerns me. Sometimes we don't think about the implications of what we're saying.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is grossly offensive when people say things like, if we deport immigrants, who's going to do the work, as if their only value comes in their labor, right? And he makes a great point about being a modern day slavery system, right? I agree with him. I believe that is so real because what happens is people hire these undocumented workers under the table. They pay them less than minimum wage, or they pay them unfair amount for the work that they're doing, just so they can get a good deal, right? And they exploit the fact that these people have no other options. And that's not opportunity, that's manipulation. That's horrible. Like the Bible tell the Israelites in the Old Testament to be fair to the foreigners that come, because you once were slaves. Listen, guys, we once were, as Christians, because I can't speak for people who are not Christian, but we once were enemies to God. Right? We're foreigners on this earth alone. Our home is in heaven with God, and God showed enough grace for us that he gave his only begotten son for us to be able to be adopted into his family, to get back into his presence, right? And so we need to consider that when we're dealing with people, right? If you're going to allow people to work, you need to pay them a fair wage. You need to give them an opportunity to provide for themselves and their families. And you need to treat them as if you were hiring any other person the legal way, right? And I feel like if you're gonna hire somebody illegally, you should be facing very similar consequences to the same people, to these illegal immigrants, right? It shouldn't all fall on the workers or the people who are vulnerable. I hate when that happens, right? We often see that the punishment goes to the people who got the least amount of power, who can't afford to pay lawyers, but the people who are exploiting them get off the hook, or they get a little slap on the wrist, and that's backwards. It's just not right. So at the end of the day, right, I feel like nobody really take the time to be empathetic about it until it hit close to home, right? Me and my neighbor was actually talking about this the other day. He's Puerto Rican, and he has somebody who's close to him and his family. I'm not going to share his business, but they're facing deportation, and they're dealing with this as well, right? And then my wife, she's actually half Mexican, she's half white. And so we have family members who are directly impacted by these issues as well. And the truth is, most of us don't really think about it until it's in our circle, until it hits close to home, until we have to deal with it and we're faced with it. And for me, I'm in the same boat. You know, I spent a lot of years in the military, over 20 years in the military. And so throughout that 20 years, the economy has been up and down. People have lost jobs or whatever. And so I didn't even have to worry about a lot of these issues because I knew on the 1st and the 15th I was going to be straight, right? I've always had a job that was stable. My family was able to be taken care of. Did it come with sacrifice and work? Yes, I spent 2 tours in Iraq. I spent 1 tour in Qatar. I spent time away from my family. I missed birthdays, the whole 9, but we were straight. And so I didn't have to think about these things. It wasn't until I retired in 2024, had a job for a year, the whole Doge thing happened, and then I was laid off, right? And so now it went from watching other people dealing with these things to it happening to me. And it happened to a close of my family members, right? And so then I was paying closer attention to the economy. Then I was paying closer attention to the number of jobs out there. And so I think we have to remember a personal issue and struggle we went through and how it felt when our family members went through it, and apply that to these people who are dealing with this whole immigration thing, right? Because it's not easy. I mean, can you imagine waking up scared to go to a store, scared to go to work, scared to go to classes because you don't know if you're going to be deported, right? And then sending your kids to school and separating, right? If you get sent away while your kids are away at school, who's going to be there to take care of your kids? It's horrible. It's horrible. And we often don't want to look at the human side of it until it's at our front door. And that's horrible. And we got to change our compassion, especially us as Christians. I'm not saying break the law. I'm not saying allow people to do illegal things and allow people to take advantage. But what I am saying is remember that these people are human. Remember that we owe the huge debt to God ourselves. And Jesus paid that debt for us. And so that should shape how we interact and deal with other people. So that's where I'm going to land the plane. That's all I have. If you agree, let me know in the comments. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. If you like the video, like it, share it with somebody else who want to hear this type of content. And the algorithm is going to show you another video, probably another one of these Lecrae reactions, because I'm going to do at least one more. And I ask that you click on it and watch it. Until next time, peace.
Yeah, I tell the truth. Pull up in tanks, just me and the troops. This ain't nothing new. Yeah, team getting smaller, we down to a few. When you see us, salute us. I've been in the water with shots, been recruiters and ears. Life getting real. Off with the lights, but we bet the city on heels. Close to the God, I just gotta be. When I wasn't, my thoughts.